the first and only definitive book on the career of Kenneth Williams. The book details all his stage, radio, TV recordings, and film work as a chronology. As part of our Authors in Lockdown series, I'm pleased to introduce the author behind this vast collection of research, Adam Endacott. Adam, how are you?
Hello, I'm all right. I've had a strain of corona, but I'm here.
Oh, really? Okay, I was going to ask how lockdown's treating you. Glad to see you've made a full recovery.
Well, I'm still 6 weeks with no taste or smell senses, but all right otherwise.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that it wasn't too serious. It's certainly strange times we're living in, it's fair to say.
Absolutely. You couldn't have planned it. What Kenneth would have made of it, I don't know.
I'm not sure what he would have made of it. I think he probably would have just hidden himself away, particularly it's fair to say, with his nervousness around any course of coughs, flus, or any kinds of germs of any description, really.
Absolutely. He'd probably been quite happy, actually, just reading and listening to music away from people. Yeah.
Probably would have been. I'm interested to start with, what was your first introduction to Kenneth Williams?
So from an early age, it was roughly about 1986 for Jack and Ori and James the Giant Peach. That combined with Will o' the Wisp repeats sort of must have had an effect on me as a 4-year-old child, and the rest is history.
He's a very intriguing character, Kenneth Williams. Multi layers to him, I think it's fair to say. Obviously you'd have known the Kenneth from television, I suppose, but when you started to go into some of the work behind the book, what were some of the early things that you were finding when you were going through that?
I think the thing that I was really pleased about, which I wanted to find out, was the happier side of Kenneth. There have been so many books and documentaries about Kenneth the suicidalist, the depressed person, whereas that wasn't always the case. He was a very happy person. The people he worked with, that they loved him. The diaries are only about 15% of what he actually wrote. So the way it's been edited is that you see all the gloom and doom. So with this book, I've hopefully given both sides, and you can see how loved he was by his co-stars and colleagues and crew. And as Lorraine Chase said, it should be a happy book because that was how she remembered Kenneth, with happy times.
Indeed. Certainly there was a lot of sensationalist stories about Kenneth, and quite a lot of that unfounded. And I read the diaries actually many, many years ago, and I found it an intriguing read. And what I think came out for me in the books particularly was how important his mum was, how influential she was in his life.
Yes, she was a stable part of his life. Lived next door to each other from 1972 onwards. And Kenneth appeared to be the one that she sort of doted on rather than Sister Pat. But I think they were often seen as a good double act. She would be in the audiences for all his radio recordings and TV shows. She can often be spied in the audience, sat there, or you can hear her laughing in some of the Just a Minute and Round the Horns. And everybody always warmly remembers her. I think she's often described as the female version of Kenneth. I think they just belted off each other, and it was a very loving relationship, although they like to have their separate times as well.
Mm-hmm. Kenneth certainly had a fairly hard time growing up. I think his dad was quite stern, quite strict on him, so obviously he gravitated more towards his mother anyway, I think.
Yes, and with his stepsister as well. Well, it's not stepsister, it's Louis had Pat before Charlie, so he had a really good relationship with his sister though. So I guess as it is, speaking from my own experience, often members of the LGBT plus community do tend to get on better with female figures.
Yes, I'd agree with that. And I think obviously the part she played, I think, was to ground him a little bit at times as well, which is possibly not a bad thing. And I think it's nice actually that you've set out with the book to sort of try and be a bit more neutral with it, so that you could actually be very clear about the works. I mean, he's done so much. I mean, if you think about radio, the films, the theatre, he's done so much, and I think the book should be happy because you're quite right. We got Kenneth, the troubled person, at times, and I don't think we should have. And if you think about it in today's world, there's lots of help and support there for people with mental health and those sorts of things. Now, it just wasn't there back then, I suppose.
That's it. I mean, if you think about it, all he had was to go back to his flat, and he used his diary as the way to express himself. And he could just pour out his feelings. There wasn't the support there is now. There isn't anything like that. And those times compared to now just shows how everything's changed and the acceptance and things like that.
Entirely agree, and I think very much for the better. And of course, radio in particular played to Kenneth's strengths because he was a voice man, wasn't he?
Very much so, and radio was always his favourite medium. He could just stand behind the microphone, do his voices, read from the script, and off he went. Caroline Blakeston remembered that for the world of Kenneth Williams, he'd just come in, whip open the envelope, pull out the script, and within half an hour they were recording. So he was just straight into it.
I mean, I love the voices in some of the early Hancock stuff. And, the radio side of it particularly suited him. And I think it was a slightly difficult transition when it was coming into TV. I mean, I don't think he was particularly natural, sort of a natural person in front of the camera. Would you agree?
Yeah, he'd sort of learning through early theatre repertory, then going into St. Joan and so on, and then going straight into Hancock. And then he'd always say that he could never act with a prop. So if he was faced for telephone or something like that, he would always struggle with. So if you watch a lot of the scenes, you'll find that hasn't got any props at all. And of course, it was early days of television. Sadly, we only got one episode of Hancock's Half Hourlies in, so we can only enjoy that one, The Alpine Holiday.
The Alpine Holiday, yes.
And only imagine what the others were like in that series. There's a few still photographs apart from that and the scripts. But
I mean, I'm sure as part of your research, you obviously came across quite a lot of sort of radio material that potentially isn't in the public domain right now.
That's it. A lot of stuff pre-1975 is missing. So if anybody wants to raid their lofts while they're in lockdown, and if that reel-to-reel tape recording is there, that'd be great. I've been very lucky meeting a chap called Keith Wickham, who has restored all the Round the Halls, Beyond Our Kens, and does a lot of BBC restoration. And he was able to help me with a lot of the material, a lot of it which I thought I'd never hear. So that was a great thrill as well.
And of course, the Carry On films he's very famous for, but also famous for not having enjoyed them in any way, shape, or form. It feels like.
Yes. So what this book does is also demonstrates his other career. He did do other films. He did other things. I think with the Carry Ons, he did enjoy it. It was another extended family for him. So he had his good chums, Joan Sims and Hetty Jakes. Mm-hmm. I think with Charles Hawtrey, they were able to have a good play pranks on each other and things like that. And I think he did enjoy it. Again, we don't have the direct extracts outside of the bits that they put in. So it probably does say back from filming, had a great time with them. I don't know. But it was happy times from what I understand from people like Juliet Mills and so forth.
Oh, that's really good to hear. And I think you're right. You pick up right there on the family, I think, because they were actually, the whole crew on Carry On really were a big family, I suppose, weren't they?
Yeah, one big repertory theatre, really. You'd known Sid James from Hancock, so they'd been working together and been working with others during his. So it was all one big happy family, and it shows in the films.
What was it that piqued your interest enough to think about setting out on the project? It's quite an ambitious project, but what was it that piqued your interest to set out on this as a project of work?
as a lifelong fan, I've always bought all the books and everything, and I've always dashed to the back to see if there's a filmography or anything like that. And I was disappointed to see there wasn't. I mean, it's included in the text, but what I wanted was an actual everything in one place. So I've been keeping sort of checklists for my own purposes of what I'd seen and what I'd listened to, and then gradually that built upon. And then it was either going to become a website or a book. And I was very fortunate meeting Kenneth's best friend, Michael Whitaker, who was a great support to me and said I should go on and make it into a book, who then introduced me to Kenneth's former agent, Michael Anderson, who also supported the project, and it went from there.
It's great having good support, because actually the research behind this is obviously probably the most important part of it, and to get those sort of early starting points, I suppose, was part of the process for you getting off onto a good start.
Very much so. I was introduced to BBC Written Archives, which has a host of information from other people. I was introduced to other people. For a Twitter account, I was able to gain some interest as well when people came forward with material. I was able to speak with photographers and editors and things like that. So it was a good wealth of material and research.
And were people quite keen to share their experiences of Kenneth with you?
They were. I mean, I went out my way and just blanket wrote to everyone he'd worked with, from Alan Bennett on an early Call My Bluff right through to Annette Crosby when they were doing The Undertaking. So some were mixed and some, because it'd been so long ago that they couldn't remember anything, and they just wished me good luck. People like Liz Fraser just said they're writing their own book and I can't help you. And then some people just said, oh, there's been other books on Kenneth. So I had to try and say, well, actually, this is a completely different concept. This is actually talk about him as a performer. So it's actually remembering when they actually worked with him rather than about him.
And was that clear to you at the start of the project that you were just going to make this almost a chronology as such?
Yes, because I didn't want to repeat. So there's been 2 biographies already, and I just didn't want to rework all that. I just wanted to actually get everything in order, what he actually did, just so, no, it was not just carry on films and round the hall. He did this and this, and show the actual dramas he did, and I mean, he even played Napoleon, which is missing, but we have stills, and it's things like that. It's just showing that he's not just your comedy actor; he did everything.
Were there any surprises along the way?
There were some very random projects he did, like talking about the anniversary of the Hiroshima bombings. So that just shows how broad his knowledge was, and that he could talk on anything. He also did a very powerful piece in 1977 about what makes Good Friday good. So he sort of touched on everything, and he also did quite a few panels about where the audience had opinions. It was on a panel show with Mary Whitehouse, and there's all those different things. It's not just about his acting and his performing.
And he always had plenty to say on some subjects, particularly. And my era of Kenneth Williams, if you think my earliest memories of him are a bit like yourself, Will o' the Wisp, Jack and Ori. But I'd see him pop up on Parkinson occasionally. He was quite fond of a chat show.
Very much so. I think the story of Orson Welles and Moby Dick wins with the most number of times it was talked about. So that was the usual with his Dame Edith Hedden's story from Gentle Jack, and then normally about being the understudy for Richard Burton in The Seagull. So that was his sort of usual stories, along with Army Tales. I think you can tell from who he's with whether he's enjoying himself or not. I mean, Mavis Nicholson, for example, were really good interviews. It's just getting the questions right, and what mood he was on the day.
And how long did the project take from start to finish?
In terms of actual research, a good sort of 15 years of toying in and out, and then actual serious writing was about 5 years.
That's one long amount of time, it's fair to say. And the amount of research that you've gone into there, it shows quite clearly in the book. And obviously that length of time, you can understand why it's taken you that kind of time when you look at the amount of detail in the book, I think it's fair to say. The Elstree book launch, which I've seen a couple of clips on YouTube, that must have been an incredibly proud moment for you.
Very much so. Just a small little do I had. Another support has been Maurice Bright, who's sort of comedy historian. He's the chairman at Elstree. I was speaking to him about Kenneth, and one thing led to another, and I ended up using Elstree Studios for the book launch. I was very fortunate that people such as Nanette Newman, Lorraine Chase, Jeremy Swan, Nigel Rees also agreed to be there as well and take part in Q&A panels. And as part of the lockdown, I've just put as its second anniversary the other week, I put it all on YouTube.
Yes, and I've enjoyed watching them a little bit this afternoon. And I think, you've only got to listen to what the guests are saying on stage, that you can really feel the appreciation for Kenneth. And, I think there's long-lasting memories there for everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, he died 32 years ago, but there's still a great love for him. He's still remembered. The next generation. He's not forgotten. He's left a huge body of work, which will, again, always be remembered, whether it is repeats of Hancock's Half Hour Around the Horn on BBC 7, Radio 7 or 4 Plus Extra, or whether it's a repeat of Carry On films on TV, on whatever channel it is. He will always be there.
He will. Very long-lasting for us, I think. Finally, Adam, what does it mean to you to have compiled and written such a detailed appreciation of the work of Kenneth Williams?
Feel very proud of it. As a lifelong fan, this is very much a work of passion. I hope that shows. I hope it's also very useful for fellow fans, for comedy historians, and also as a timepiece for just detailing a different time when entertainment was at its peak in the radio years and things such as that. I'm still finding out more. I'm still finding more information. So if there is a paperback, then there's some additions to put in. I've been fortunate that some people have come forward with some stuff that I didn't have as well. So it's now continuing on to be just out there trying to find the missing material.
Well, I'm sure when the paperback version comes along, I'm sure we'll be really keen to include all of that new information and make it as up to date as we possibly can for anybody that wishes to purchase the book. I think it's really important there. I'd like to thank you, Adam, for joining us to share some of your experiences on the journey and your insight into Kenneth Williams. Really appreciate your time today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Jason.